Good evening and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of America. Today is February 19th, 2015, and very cold day, probably one of the coldest or maybe the coldest day of this winter. And I'm always talking about the weather and the climate with people, and as you probably know, I am one of those climate deniers, and I don't like to call myself that because it sounds like Holocaust denier, and it's not really like you're denying the climate. You're not denying that the weather and the climate change, because the climate does change, and it has gotten warmer in the past, and it has gotten colder in the past, and in the future it will get warmer, and in the future it will get colder. But I did get on a I once in a while look at sun sites for astronomers who look at the sun, and they study the sun, and they record the changes in the sun, because the sun does change, and particularly the sunspots. And so it was very interesting because you learn a lot. They know about the climate and how it changes because they can predict the climate very well. And they have the records to prove that they have predicted the climate. And how do you predict the changes that are coming in the climate? You look at the sunspot activity. That, yes, folks, that is really what it's about. Now, the climate alarmists, the cult of people who believe that CO2 is the cause of climate change, do not want you to look at the sun as the driver of warmth and cooling on planet Earth. But in fact, the sun, this is the big news, is actually runs planet Earth. Humans do not run planet Earth. Okay? The amount of CO2 that we produce is less than the amount of CO2 that comes out of many other sources on planet Earth, including volcanoes, which can radically cool the planet and have in the past, and it's all on record. But the sun runs the show. It's no surprise that tribal societies, ancient societies, worshiped the sun as a god. But what the astronomers who look at the sun notice are that the sunspot activity is reduced on the sun right now, and we're just in the solar maximum, and the solar maximum means a large sunspot activity time period, and it's 11 or 12 year cycle, and so the solar maximum is just, and there's a big sunspot on the sun right now, but not as big as in the past. And they look back through their records and they say, okay, well, here is the sunspot. This is very similar to like 1928. And so here's what happened that in the years following 1928 as a result of this particular very similar solar maximum sunspot activity time. And therefore, we can expect that planet Earth will experience a similar resulting climate in that cycle period. And what they're saying is they're looking at 20 years plus of cooler temperatures on planet Earth. And so this, of course, flies in the face of the global alarmists who say that we're on the verge of a huge increase in the overall activity. And what they're doing is just changing the numbers. They're cooking the books. They're making up a bunch of stories. They've been caught numerous times in blatant lying about the temperature, the readings that they're getting, and they have lied on maps of Greenland, in which, for instance, a very important map came out a year or so ago about Greenland, which showed that the Greenland ice was melting around the edges of Greenland very clearly. But there was only one problem with that. It was inaccurate, because people got online and looked at the satellite photos. There were up-to-date satellite photos, and they matched them side by side. You could see the difference clearly from the satellite photo of Greenland. See, because Greenland is not one of those places where if the ice sheets of Greenland would melt, that would make a difference in sea level. Ice that melts, ocean ice, sea ice, that is not going to make any difference. If every bit of ice melted on the North Pole, it would not make the sea level rise, because the sea ice displaces the water as it builds up. It sinks and displaces the same amount of water. But it's not going to be happening. In fact, we're looking at cooler temperatures. Cooler temperatures means, in a sense, it's not a good thing, really, for planet Earth to have cooling temperatures, because people suffer. Animals suffer. Insects suffer. Plants suffer. The life in general, likes warm weather. And believe me, the polar bears are not going to go extinct. They're not in any danger of going extinct. When they were put on the extinction list as being an endangered species, that was a purely political ploy. All right, well, let's talk about some of the other lives that are going on, particularly in the Middle East. I have a clip of about 16 or 17 minutes of Alex Jones. I don't usually put Alex Jones on this, but I thought that this was his effort to explain a very complex, which he calls simple, and in a way it is simple. I suppose if you look at it every day, you need to educate yourself about what the complexities of what is really a very simple program to destabilize the Middle East for political and economic purposes. So let's roll that clip, and then I'll get back with you.
Here's the Wall Street Journal headline: U.S. to give some Syrian rebels ability to call airstrikes after training moderate rebels to get pickups with gear to call for American B-1B bombers. And, of course, they trained the first group of moderates and the second group of moderates, and scores of groups to be sent in who just promptly join al-Qaeda and ISIS. And I've had Colonel Schaefer and others on to break that down. I see a comment on Infowars.com in the article, Why Obama Refuses to Call It Islamic Terrorism. And Jack says, Islamic threat? I thought ISIS was a CIA-run unit and fake. That's not exactly what we said. In order to take our rights, according to Alex Jones. So, by Alex Jones' own admission, he should be praising Obama for resisting the New World Order created war. This is a dialectic to confuse the weak-minded. I'm going to try to explain this to Jack very slowly and very sweetly. When they used the radical Islamists with Saudi Arabian funding in 1979 under Zbigniew Brzezinski's plan to launch wars, not just in Afghanistan, but areas bordering Afghanistan to the north and to the west, forcing the Russians to come in to respond. That was a trap. So they didn't totally control the jihadis. They were funding them, they were arming them, and then later they were supposedly blowback on 9/11. But the door was opened, and Saudi Arabia was there running the operation, the 28 pages. Senator Graham of the 9/11 Commission has gone public. And I've talked to Walter Jones, a congressman. He's gone public. And Colonel Schaefer and everybody else. Okay, so I was right again, period. So I'm going to explain this to you. It isn't just black or white where it's either 100% run or it is 100% run. 4.5 years ago, a program was launched in Libya, in Syria, and Egypt, and a bunch of other places to overthrow the governments and put radicals in. Obama and other Soros-connected groups, even above the CIA, they do this even outside government. This stuff's so criminal. Went in And with Google Analytics and with Facebook behind it, they all met the same place Bilderberg met a few years ago. They met there a few years before that. They're north of London. This has all been publicly released and funded the Arab Spring, where they get the students and everybody out the street. But then the radicals use that once they take over to coup d'etat the coup. And then now you have an Islamic State over Libya, over Saudi Arabia, which is already quarterbacking it, over Syria, over Egypt. So there's Wesley Clark. We have it on screen. Libya and Syria, the neocon plan to attack 7 countries in 5 years using destabilization. Once you destabilize, you then have an excuse to come in and bomb the very groups you turned loose to begin with. So Obama is acting like he's a moderate and that he's only fighting, some of the radicals because, he loves Islam so much. The truth is, they're doing limited airstrikes on different disparate rebel groups that are in there battling for control of Syria that the West opened the door for to get them buggy whipped into line so that then they can be forged into a new army to go in and take out Syria. And the excuse will be because of the Syrian civil war that gave ISIS a home base, that gave Al-Qaeda a home base. And so now we've got to go in and clean out the whole country. It's Assad's fault. We've already heard this. You're going to hear it again. That's why they're saying, we're there with rebels now, calling in airstrikes and giving them weapons with billions of dollars of funding that Congress has passed in 3 different spending packages the last 4 or 5 months. Billions of dollars. And it's in the Wall Street Journal that, the good rebels are being given vehicles and they're allowed to launch attacks. And then you'll see these very vehicles in a month flying ISIS flags, and no one will go, wait a minute, we gave them that. Or they might say, ISIS captured it. Just like they captured Iraqi bases full of artillery and new weapons and RPGs, like the Marines and the Army just left those weapons caches in bases and didn't defend them or didn't have self-destruct bombs, didn't have detonators already placed to blow up ammo dumps. They let them have it. And all they need is the plausible deniability, just like Benghazi and the heat-seeking missiles, the anti-aircraft surface-to-air missiles. So I've been here since Benghazi happened and before, telling you exactly what would unfold, and now it is. And your response is, Islamic threat? Close quote. I thought ISIS was a CIA-run unit and fake in order to take our rights. Yes, they're now having a radical extremism meeting, and most of it they're now saying is going to be about gun owners and right-wingers and veterans and Tim McVeigh types. See, you're seeing it. I told you, year after year, they're going to let the Islamic radical threat take place, then they're going to target domestic groups. And you're seeing that yet again with a 2-day summit that's about to begin, and you're going to hear all about domestic groups. Guaranteed. So they're going to use the shootings and the bombings and all the rest of it happening in Europe right now to then be projected on to the general public and the people resisting the globalist takeover. The people resisting the fact that our borders are wide open and we're now in a North American Union and having our basic freedoms dissolved. And the government's announcement is going to start coming after your private pension funds and your investment funds and your education funds, your retirement funds. They're putting the police state in for the American people, but they need the average cops and even the average FBI and CIA to go along with its implementation, believing it's for the radical Islamicist threat. But now they're converting and shifting to the domestic threat, which I've told you thousands of times obnoxiously they would, and now it's happening. And then when they're done, they're going to blow up buildings, this criminal international group. They're going to shoot up schools. They're going to do you name it, and they're going to blame Alex Jones and talk radio in general and free speech and anyone that is not totally in line with foreign banks gutting this country and Obamacare and open borders and your kids being taught at age 5 how to have sex and this whole agenda to take over our society and forced inoculations and the rest of it. We were called racist a couple of weeks ago saying guaranteed these new measles strains, because we could read the medical reports getting filed by doctors, are coming out of Latin America and the Philippines and other countries. These are super mutated strains. California measles identical to type found in the Philippines, LA Times today. But their answer is we should all be forced to take the vaccines, but it's people who've had the vaccines that are getting it. 20 new cases. Oh my gosh, no one's died. It's the end of the world. Run for the hills. So let me go through these headlines for you. U.S. to give some Syrian rebels ability to call airstrikes. Told you that would happen. Stories up on Infowars.com because that's the Wall Street Journal, but Mikhail did a story adding more background and more depth to it. Why Obama refuses to call it Islamic terrorism. Infowars.com. Exclusive. U.S. may have let dozens of terrorists into the country as refugees. Oh, my goodness. Several dozen suspected terrorist bomb makers, including some believed to have targeted American troops, may have mistakenly been allowed, yeah, right, to move to the United States as war refugees, according to FBI agents investigating the remnants of roadside bombs recovered from Iraq and Afghanistan. And just like before 9/11, FBI agents tried to stop them training at the air bases and training at the flight schools, and were told they would be shut down and that they would be basically fired or indicted if they continued. And then John O'Neill, the head of anti-terrorism, basically was forced to resign. His first day at work was September 11th, and he supposedly died in the building. You can't make that up. And he gave a speech in England 2 months before he died saying, our government, you can pull this up, our government is going to allow al-Qaeda to attack us to take American liberties. That's a John O'Neill quote. You can actually see blow-ups of it quoted from whichever British newspaper it was, and the New Yorker magazine reported on it in my film, Road to Tyranny. My memory can't pull up the exact dates, but I just gave you his quotes. And again, you've got criminals, a very small group at the top, that need to manipulate the state police, manipulate the local police, manipulate the FBI, manipulate the public, manipulate the military, where it's all confusing. I said 6-8 months ago, yeah, I agree when Rand Paul says, yeah, we should probably bomb ISIS, but why did our government help them get a foothold in Syria? See, they know the public can't get that sophisticated anymore because they haven't been taught how things work or how to look at things from a sophisticated perspective up above it, not emotionally from one side or the other. Kind of like Robert Kiyosaki was saying yesterday, there's three sides to every coin, heads, tails, and the edge. There's the headline. The counter-terrorist. John O'Neill was an FBI agent with an obsession, the growing threat of al-Qaeda. That was in 2002, January 14th. And then we can probably find the British one with the quote. It really had the hardcore quote where he gave a speech saying the government is going to let al-Qaeda hit us. And I remember seeing articles on the BBC, like FBI agents say it's as if al-Qaeda has moles above them at the FBI. Well, it's more than that. The globalists have moles in all these institutions. And why is insider trading allowed by Congress? Why is insider trading? Because the Justice Department is totally compromised. And they'll only go after somebody for a crooked toenail, or if some patriot bounces a check, they'll call it money laundering and throw you in jail with their cooked-up kangaroo juries. And everybody better worry because they're getting ready to gut this country. I mean, the corruption has built to a level that is mind-boggling. The IRS targeting more than 50,000 conservatives and libertarians and Christians and pro-life groups under Justice Department orders. I mean, they're one step away from trying to round everybody up. And believe me, if there wasn't a Second Amendment in place, they'd do it. But the good news is they've got a 7 to 8% approval rating in Congress. People know what's going on. They're aware of the corruption, and the American people are not buying it. And now it's giving cover to good people in the NSA, in the CIA, in the FBI. Whereas corrupt as those agencies are, those are some of the most awake people you'll ever talk to because they're living it. I was talking to a high-level state judge. I'll just leave it at that. And he said, no, I would, basically hear the stuff you talk about years ago and think it was crazy, but look at the IRS stuff. Look at us funding al-Qaeda in Syria. It's true. It's crazy. Look at warrantless blood draws on the side of the highway. Look at illegals allowed to commit felonies and being released. I mean, does anyone think this is just going to stop here? No, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. When Colonel Schaefer exposed the fact with Stratus Ivy and all those secret operations, he didn't release any of the secret stuff, but just the fact that they could have killed bin Laden twice in the month before 9/11, They tried to indict him for like $66, you can look it up, of unpaid, not unpaid, of phone calls on his colonel's cell phone to his wife, saying it was theft to call his wife on his cell phone, even though in the guidelines it says, of course, you can call your spouse. Hey, I'm not coming home. I got to go here or there. Or help me get my bags packed. They began the indictment investigation. But he didn't back down. So they backed off. Imagine how criminal these people are. Oh, hey, we could have killed bin Laden twice, but we were ordered to stand down. Oh, we're going to indict you for $66 of a phone bill. You're a thief. But I read from Judicial Watch yesterday where it said in the ICE memos, you may think letting a drunk driver or other criminal go is going to let them go down the road and hurt someone and that death's on your hands. No, it is not. They didn't cite any precedent. They didn't cite any law. They lied to you and said you can selectively enforce the law. I mean, it's bold to put that on paper. They're now putting police. Do you think police like quotas? You think they like watching a cop get paid $130,000 a year who writes 5 times more tickets than them? Police hate it. They've bought ads in the New York paper, the police union. We've got a tape we're going to play in the next segment of the police commander going, listen, you write tickets and you arrest people or you're going to be fired. Now get out there. But don't arrest illegals. Can you imagine? Make arrest, issue tickets, or get fired. Missouri police caught in discussing quota scheme. And the issue is they pull over some poor black lady or Hispanic lady or white lady who's a citizen. They got 3 kids in the back of the car. The woman's got her maid equipment. I was talking to a cop about this years ago. She doesn't have insurance. And she says, man, I just can't afford it. And what am I going to do? Go on welfare? And the cop said he couldn't write her a ticket. And then they reviewed the dash cam and basically sanctioned him because he just couldn't do it with the sick kid in the back with snot running down their face and 2 other kids. And the woman's a maid, totally exhausted. She just says, I don't have any money. I can't pay it. And that cop knew full well he can't give an illegal alien a ticket for that. Or if they do, he gets in trouble. But he's got to give it to that American citizen. That is sickening discrimination, ladies and gentlemen. Excuse me, I'm digressing. But is there something wrong with me? Because the military got it 2 years ago that we were the Air Force of Al-Qaeda in Syria and said they wouldn't be part of it, and it stopped. So they rebranded it, had it invade Iraq to get a bunch of U.S. bases, weapons caches, to turn back around and go back into Syria. And now we've got to take over Syria to get rid of Al-Qaeda, ISIS's foothold. I mean, that's so simple. Before we go to break, please understand, this broadcast is exploding right now. Affiliates, listenership, the podcast, the YouTube videos, everything we do, people really get now that we know what we're talking about and that we're in a lot of trouble. We're just one focal point of many. Thank God. There's a lot of safety in there being so many patriots now. So start your show. Get involved. But you need to spread the word about the broadcast and not take it for granted. Because when I tell you that the establishment is nipping at my heels, believe me, it's going on. So pray for us, support us, and buy the products. These products will knock your socks off. I set out to bring you the most hardcore stuff. I tested a lot of stuff. I used a lot of vitamins, minerals, talked to a lot of top people. We bring you the very best Nation Iodine out there. Frankly, we believe it's the only true Nation Iodine out there. We bring you the very best methylcobalamin, organic vitamin B12, Secret 12, bring you the very best Ancient Defense Herbal Booster Immunity. You get a free bottle. Find out about that at Infowars.com, InfoWarsLife.com. 20% off on Super Male and Super Female Vitality in the month of February. Try it, ladies and gentlemen. The energy, the stamina, the things it's done for me.
There he is, the man himself, sort of very important figure in trying to get people straight on really a lot of issues. The guy who's kind of built an empire in the alternative media, trying to get things headed in a different direction. Of course, Alex Jones is probably most known for on air, on his show, predicting that they were going to probably, the quote is something like, they will probably get Muslims to fly airplanes into buildings. Something like that. And this is before 9/11. And it was the reason why he was able to make that prediction so accurately is because he was so involved and so obsessively nose to the grindstone, ear to the ground, looking at the world, the news, all the reports, reading the reports that come out. These people write books about their plans, they give speeches, and they often project into the future what they think is required. And the project for the New American Century is what pops into mind first for me, in which they actually talk about hijacking airplanes and using them as bombs, using them as flying weapons. And so it was actually used, this was thought about years ago. So we always have to look at, and I've talked about this before, we always have to look at the possibility that what we're being presented as reality is actually not that way. That there is spin, that there is English put onto all news stories, and some are simply mendacity and lies presented to us out of whole cloth, directly in your face, telling us something that is true, which is patently, blatantly false. And they know how to show this information, present this information to the public in a way that the public will believe it, because they have control of the mainstream media, the state-run media. The major news sources are controlled by a very small group of men, a small group of companies, 5 now. There used to be many, many more, but they've consolidated and they continue to consolidate, and they now coordinate the message because they have a mutual goal, which is to aggrandize themselves, get bigger, make more money, gain power. And of course, at the very top, even above the level of that, you have people at the very top of the pyramid who have their own agenda, and they're often trillionaires, you know, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in their pocket, available to use to shape the world any way that they see fit. And they cannot not do that. These are ambitious men. They're intelligent men. They're educated men. They see it. They see that what am I doing here on this planet with all this money and power? What am I doing here if I am not going to use it for the betterment of what? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Is it the betterment for the betterment of humanity as a whole, or is it for the betterment of that elite group at the very top and their friends and their relatives and their class, their cronies? What's better for them? And people do have this tribal feeling. You have your tribe. Kurt Vonnegut called the crass. He called it that in Cat's Cradle, in which you have the people that you know, your group, so to speak. And so they get together and they think about, you know, they're bored with just playing golf. They're bored with sitting around on their yachts. They like to get things done. That's how they got there in the first place, at the very top of the heap. And so they are very ruthless. They're sociopaths for the most part, who have no conscience, no shame, no guilt, no empathy, no sympathy. That's just the way that they're made. That's how their brains work. And they are literally the people who say the ends justify the means, and the ends, they could say, well, it's what is best for the earth. They might even put it that way. Not what is best for humanity, but what is best for the earth. And what is bad for the earth, from the way they look at it, is humanity. Not them personally, but the people who are below them in the pyramid, who could be a threat to their power, for one thing, but also they might say, well, look at these people, they're using too much carbon, and they're heating up the world, which we know to be not true, but that's the excuse that they're using to give people that sense of shame and guilt for using natural resources that they really oftentimes have very little option but to use those fossil fuels in order to stay warm in the winter, for instance, to stay cool in the summer. And those are denied them. They want to deny them, and ultimately they want to get rid of that population, that excess population, the extra billions of people, and many, many people agree with this. Not only the people at the very top are thinking this way, but people below them, and in the middle class, and they see all the suffering, and they think we can alleviate this. We just need to get the population down to a manageable level. And this is the way rulers, of course, always think, that, look, I'm superior, look at me, I'm at the top, I know what to do, I know what's best, and so why don't I just manipulate the agenda to make my dream, my great dream of nirvana or utopia come true, and here's how we're going to get from point A to point B. And yeah, you've got to break some eggs in order to make an omelet, but what other choice do we have? If we don't do it, global warming is going to destroy the planet. Well, global warming is not going to destroy the planet. For one thing, we're not told in all the hysterical documents that are coming out by the so-called scientists who are claiming that the computer models show catastrophe, sea level rise of unbelievable, amount, 5 feet, everybody's going to be in a tropical, just a horrifying, sweating, just unbelievable heat, the sun beating down, just awful. It's just going to be terrible. People won't even be able to live in what is now the tropical zone. They'll be fleeing, mass exodus. It'll be everybody will have to be moving up to Canada because it'll be just so hot because of these scenarios that these computer models are creating are false. They've been proven to be false over and over. In a computer model, however you program that computer model, that is going to be how that outcome is going. It's going to dictate the outcome of the computer model. And back in the 80s with James Hansen, and he's the father of global warming, and then there was the grandfather of global warming who came before him, and I can't think of his name, Holland, can't think of his, John Holland or something. Anyway, he came up with the theory, took it so far of man-made global warming, CO2 causing global warming because it's a greenhouse gas. And they always neglect the most common greenhouse gas, which is water vapor. And so that doesn't fit into the model because it doesn't look good. It makes, they use in the graph to see which greenhouse gas is most causing the climate change. They always want it to be CO2. Carbon. The idea that carbon is toxic, it's dangerous, it needs to be controlled, it needs to be taxed. And that's, of course, the origin of the cap and trade system that has been pushed for years. Al Gore actually owns a carbon trade, cap and trade brokerage called Gore and Blood. And they've just been sitting waiting for these carbon taxes, this cap and trade system, to be adopted worldwide, and they're failing. His billions, the multi-billion-dollar profits that he had hoped to make with his company is actually not panning out the way he had hoped that it would, because we're not seeing the global warming that was predicted. And a lot of this, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, is due to, well, most of it, or all of it, I suppose, really you could say. You might as well just call a spade. It's the sun. The sun is not cooperating with the global warming people. It's just not putting out the heat to make the earth really, really much, much, much hotter. It's just simply not happening. And the incredible claim that is supposedly factual, that last year was the hottest year on record, and the year before that was the hottest year on record, is an absolute fabrication and made up by cooking of the numbers. If you look back through history, you will see the Little Ice Age, which took place between about 1645 and 1715, of very extreme cold temperatures. Almost no sunspot activity during that period. Then you also have the medieval warming period, the medieval warming period, which was a global event. Don't let them tell you that it was local. It was not local. And there are plenty of records from this medieval period talking about how, for instance, in England, that England was a very nice place, a very good climate to grow grapes in. And grapes require a level of warmth that is usually found in southern France. Okay, during the medieval warming period, the temperatures rose on the planet enough to create a pleasant enough climate to grow, to make grapes flourish in England. We can also look at the same thing on the American side. What was the name that the Vikings called Nova Scotia when they visited here in the medieval period? This is well before 1492. Vineland, they called it. Why? Because they were looking at the grapes. They were seeing flourishing wild grapes in this much warmer climate. If you go to Nova Scotia, you will see that it's a very much colder climate up there now, and it is not a good place to be growing grapes. They need a specific temperature, a level of temperature that gives you a good long growing season. So it was indeed not a local phenomenon, but it was a global. And if you look in other places in the world, you see the same thing during the same warming trend in that period, the medieval. In Greenland, there were colonies of Scandinavians during the medieval warming period, and you could see the foundations of their colonies. They were growing crops, and you don't see them now. They all had to leave because it cooled off again, and the crops were not flourishing, and the plants were not flourishing. Plants like warmth. And indeed, if you look at the actual statistics, the graphs, you will see that it is not the CO2 that causes the global warming. It's the opposite. The global warming causes the rise in CO2. And you also you don't have desertification as a result, in general, as a result of global warming, but you have oftentimes the opposite effect. You have plants and trees that are really enjoying the warm temperatures and taking over what is formerly desert. And we can remember, of course, also back in the 70s when the watchword was global cooling. Scientists were really afraid that we were going into back into an ice age type of situation during the 70s, and the 60s too, but particularly during the 70s. Because the temperatures globally were going down at that time, and we had a couple of horrifically cold winters in the late 70s, and it was probably the high point of that fear. And they said that global cooling caused desertification. I can remember that very specifically. I have a book at home about global cooling from that era. I think it came out in like 1978 or something. And so they were very concerned and of starvation that would cause as a result of global cooling. So you can't have it both ways, my friends. I mean, does global warming cause desertification, or does global cooling cause desertification? Or does everything cause desertification? Well, I don't think everything causes desertification. I think that men do cause a lot of damage to the planet, don't get me wrong. If men were not here, then we wouldn't be having all these problems with the loss of deserts. I mean, some of it's just poor farming practices that cause desertification. When all the topsoil gets blown away because of you're not taking care of it, or if you're fishing all the fish out of the sea, or if you're pouring toxic waste into the ocean, into the rivers, into the streams, into the lakes, if you're doing geoengineering in the stratosphere with this military jets that you see everywhere, and they lay down this cloud, and these clouds, they don't go away. They just spread for hours and they crisscross the sky, and it looks like they're playing tic-tac-toe up there. And you see these jets turn, and sometimes you'll see two of them, and they turn together. And it's like they're turning around at a right angle, not just a little turn, oftentimes. I mean, I've been watching these things for years. You'll have a perfectly blue sky, and then after a couple of hours after these jets are done, and these jets are all over the sky, you can count them, 6, 7, 8, 9 jets in different places, laying down these trails, and then they feather out in a line right across the sky, and they gradually dim that blue sky. And mostly these jets do this in Western countries. Europe, America, the NATO countries are where most of the geoengineering goes on. And officially it's not happening, of course. If you were to ask a military guy or a politician whether we are using jets to geoengineer the stratosphere, they would say no. And why do they say no? Either they don't know about it, they're not in on it, or they would say, well, no, we're not doing it, because that's what they do. That's what they do. They lie, because why do they lie? Well, it's top secret. They can't be giving out that kind of information. It's secret. And not even to reporters, and reporters or even the president. It's above the level of the president. Oh, your security clearance isn't high enough for us to tell you what's really going on. Even though if you look up, you can see it with your own eyes, it's hiding in plain sight. And that's why we live in the United States of amnesia, because people can't remember back when there were no chemtrails. They don't remember that there was a time in which vapor trails did not just hang for hours in the sky. They don't remember that. Now it's interesting, if you look in the movies that were made, in the westerns, you look in the westerns that were made in the 50s and the 60s, 70s and 80s. Of course, now almost no westerns are made, but many of them were made in the desert, in the West, of course, obviously. And they have lots of big sky westerns, lots of sky, much of it shot outdoors. You almost never see a vapor trail that just hangs in the sky. You don't see them. And don't tell me that the directors always remembered that, oh, there's a vapor trail. Well, hey, these vapor trails are all over the sky. If that were an issue, those westerns would have had to shut down for that day, because, baby, you're not going to be able to show the sky on that day, because those vapor trails are creating a huge spider web of white mist trailing off the edge, the line that goes right down to multiple lines. And so, I mean, I think, to me, that's evidence that these did not exist, and that they are putting chemicals and metal nanoparticles into the sky for the purpose of, well, they claim that it's preventing global warming. But I think their agenda is much more sinister than that. A lot of people think that. I'm not making this up. That they have their own agenda, that they are attempting to essentially reduce the population. I guess that's what it comes down to. It's all it's an attack on the health of the American people and the people of the developed world, to get them out of the picture for the future, to reduce the level of their immune systems, the ability of their immune systems to fight off disease. And so when they decide, and this sounds very sinister and evil, but I'm going to say it anyway, so that when they decide that they want to release the real pathogen, the really dangerous airborne pathogen, which Obama actually hinted that was what was going to happen when he was talking about Ebola. He basically said Ebola is just a dry run. It's a drill. It's a dry run for the real pathogen that's going to be airborne, that could be released, that you might see or that you will see in the future. Bingo. Bingo. And yeah, this is some scary stuff. But that behooves us, behooves us to avoid the toxins in the food, in the water, wherever we can. And you have to keep that health up. It's so important. Avoid those vaccines. Now the scandal is breaking about the vaccines. The MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, very dangerous to little tiny children, particularly. They want to give this to newborns, extremely dangerous. 3 separate shots in one shot. No, they couldn't even space them out. I listened to a talk by Andrew Wakefield, he's called the father of the anti-vaccine movement, which is really picking up speed, especially among wealthy and educated people. Not dumb, ignorant, stupid people, but wealthy, educated people are making sure that that they avoid getting those vaccines for their kids, because they are becoming more and more aware of the dangers of vaccines. And Andrew Wakefield is an English doctor, and he and his colleague, and I can't remember his name, put out a paper, and they were destroyed as a result of putting out this paper. They lost their ability to practice medicine. Now his colleague has just regained his license, his ability to practice, but Dr. Wakefield has not been able to. He just doesn't have the money. It costs a lot of money to take this all the way through the court system to fight this. But in terms of public opinion, the man is completely vindicated. And so he's back, and the truth, if it's true, it tends to gradually, over the long run, win out. It may not win out right away. What was it that Mark Twain said? A lie will go around the world before the truth can get its pants on in the morning, or something like that. And so the truth is a slow starter, but it eventually, over time, wins out. It tends to win out. It may take years, but eventually. So Andrew Wakefield, very interesting, incredibly, he's actually very mild in his criticisms of the vaccines. He recommended, why give the children the MMR? Why do we have to do that? How about if we just space it out? That would be safer. Measles, 1 shot. Wait a year, 6 months. Mumps shot. Rubella shot. 3 separate. So the kid doesn't get that enormous load of toxins and bacteria or a virus at once. There are also toxins, like I said, toxins in the vaccines that do side effect damage, very dangerous. If you look at the insert of that is given out with the shot, it's free, with the vaccine itself, you can read there yourself the long list of extremely dangerous diseases, that, including measles, that can result from having received the vaccine, and also autoimmune diseases that are basically permanent, and autism. And recently, of course, there was a whistleblower who has come forward and said that we lied about the MMR. I think his name was like William Thompson or something. And he was one of the guys that lied and said that there was no connection found in the studies that they did, the CDC did, about the connection between autism and the vaccines. He said we lied, and he's come forward. The guilt got to him. He's not a sociopath. And now you can look it up. This is for real. So the very people who lied to you and harmed these children are now coming, one of them at least is now coming forward, has come forward, has gotten the megaphone and is shouting to the world that the MMR is a dangerous and toxic vaccine. So if you have kids, we need to avoid. Don't fall for the propaganda that you need the herd immunity, that everybody needs to get it. My gosh, the vaccination levels are high enough as it is, very high already, and the kids are getting sick because vaccination is no definite guarantee against getting that particular disease. It may or may not give you immunity. It may give you the disease. Because what does a vaccine do? All it is, it's an attenuated, a weakened strain of the virus, which the doctors hope will cause a response, so you create antibodies to that disease. Now that may or may not happen. If a child is really strong, has a strong immune system, it might do that. But if the child has a weak immune system, The child may simply get the disease from the vaccine because it can't fight off even the weakened strain. It can't create enough antibodies to destroy the weakened strain of the virus that has been introduced into your bloodstream, directly into your bloodstream via a shot. And this doesn't even address the very real problem with the thimerosal, if that's how you pronounce it, which is aluminum based, which is used as a preservative, which is also introduced into your body at the same time. Now, my understanding is that some of these upper level elite people, they get, like in Germany and places, if you're wealthy and powerful, you don't have to take the poisoned vaccine. Your kids can take a clean version of the vaccine. Can you imagine? This is almost eugenics. This is genocide. Verges on genocide. This is criminal. That there would be a clean vaccine that certain people would be allowed to take and others would not be allowed to take or would not have access to. I just saw an ad the other day. Apparently in Texas, you can get a vaccination with your Happy Meal at McDonald's. Can you believe that? How desperate are these people that they would want you to actually fall for this? And then maybe some people are. And it's free, folks. You can put your child at risk of a whole list of diseases, including autism and other Guillain-Barré and autoimmune diseases. You can put them at risk for free if you buy a Happy Meal. And that's going to make your kids real happy, I'm sure. So, yeah, we have to watch this. We have to be careful. We have to always do the research. Don't trust what I have to say or anyone else has to say. But it's all available thanks to our First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. And so what do we got? We've got a beautiful opportunity that's available to us to do some research, educate ourselves. That's what education is really about. It'll help you tremendously to make decisions on your own, and which is what a parent or anyone needs to do, make those decisions on their own. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. That's all for today. Sleep well, friends, and have a great weekend.